Edward Steichen says that walking along one day, he'll notice something he's seen many times before, but on this one particular day, he'll suddenly see. It isn't that he sees clearer, he says, but that living has prepared him somehow for a new vision.
It's only the person that is open-minded and receptive to new things or accidental things that happen that can make use of them. This question of accident, the man who can take advantage of the accident is only a man who recognizes them and who is always ready for the unexpected to happen. A photographer, for instance, never really makes a photograph unless he's moved by it, is excited by it, or deeply interested in it. A picture taker and a button pusher, I would particularly call them, he just shoots at things that he has seen other people do. The photographer establishes a relationship, an intimate relationship between himself and whatever he's photographing, whether it's a can of beans, a landscape, or Greta Garbo.
New York, the 20s, and Edward Steichen at 44, the most famous and the most expensive photographer in the world. His Vogue magazine pictures set the 20s style. He takes that age-old American pleasure and pride in salesmanship, says he likes making pictures that talk to people, whether it's gowns to wealthy women, silverware to the newlyweds, or hand lotion to the housewife with dishpan hands. Today in Connecticut, Steichen looks out over the pond he named Jergens, after the lotion that paid for it. He says he's still amused at the thought he once was too commercial.
Well, I don't know any form of art that isn't or hasn't been commercial. Michelangelo, on his deathbed, is supposed to have complained that he never had an opportunity to do what he wanted to do. There were always popes and potentates that were giving him orders and commissions for what they wanted him to do. But he made a fine job filling that bill. And that's the job that faces the photographer who sells his pictures as illustrations, either for magazines or books or for advertising purposes.
In the 20s and 30s, everybody who mattered met in Steichen photographs on the pages of Vanity Fair, a witty, glittering almanac of whatever was excellent and whoever was exciting. George Gershwin, Alexander Wolcott, Jack Sharkey, George M. Cohen and Eugene O'Neill, Robert Moses, Gallant Fox, Marlene Dietrich, Charlie Chaplin, and Greta Garbo.
Garbo came in off the set. The director says, now you have only 5 minutes. I said, all right. So I had a kitchen chair there for her to sit on. I draped my black frequency cloth over the back. I asked her to sit on that chair. She sat on the chair, and like a good sport, she straddled the chair, leaned her arms on the back, facing me. And then I started the photograph, and she would turn her head this way and shake her head in this way. And this wasn't the Garbo that I was interested in. This was the regular Hollywood Garbo. So I said, it's too bad we have to photograph all these things with the hairdo that you wear in the thing, this Hollywood hairdo. She said, oh, this hair. Put her hand up to her head and brushed them back. And I said, Greta, now let's make a photograph of that. And the good sport again that she was, she went into it. And those are the only pictures I have ever used of Greta Garbo. No one has ever made, either in painting or anything, in photography, a complete portrait of a person. I don't think that's possible in any one picture. For instance, everybody has the capacity for laughter and tears, and there's no place in between that expresses the whole thing. But I, long ago, came to the conclusion that if you could get one moment of reality shining out of that person, that was as much as you could get in the portrait, and then you had something essential.
One moment of reality. Edward Steichen, a self-portrait. Turn of the century romantic, painter and photographer of blurry moonlights and snowy landscapes made moody by jiggling his tripod and occasionally spitting on his lens. Off to Paris, the place in 1901 to paint, to photograph, to meet the masters. Curious, experimental, eager for the unexpected, he admits to making mischief with a camera. Rubbing his thumb across wet photographs, which he says he should not ought to, he turns them into old masters, new old masters. But when he recalls Paris now, he thinks first of his meeting with Auguste Rodin, to him the greatest sculptor since Michelangelo.
I brought out my portfolio with fear and trembling, and Rodin looked at it and seemed to be very much interested, said some nice things about them, and so I turned to him with great gusto and enthusiasm. I said, "The greatest ambition of my life, master, is to make a photograph of you." And he put his hand on my shoulder and turned to Fritz and said, "You see, Fritz, enthusiasm isn't dead yet in this world," which was very nice, and I can just hear it today yet.
A year of watching before Steichen takes the picture. Rodin, his marble Victor Hugo, his bronze thinker.
I think it's probably the most satisfactory photograph I ever made. That is, to me, it's the only one that has never become a pain in the neck.
Rodin, the first of the moderns to be introduced to New York by Steichen and his friend Alfred Stieglitz at the Photo Secession Gallery, a new kind of gallery to show both painters and photographers.
We had the Rodin exhibition, which attracted a great deal of attention, favorable and unfavorable. Most of it was derision. The critics had a field day. The next exhibition I had arranged was Matisse watercolors. And then followed a succession. Cézanne's work, Braque, Picasso. The whole modern movement got its first introduction in New York several years before the famous Armory show, in these little exhibitions at the Photo Station, which then already had lost the title in the eyes of the public of the Photo Station. It was called 291. That was the address, 291 Fifth Avenue.
But Steichen himself, the young man who had come to Paris with a camera and a palette, had second thoughts about the palette.
As a painter, I had been producing what was a high-grade wallpaper. It was bought by people of means, and they were hung in a gold frame on their walls, and that was the end of them. I had no contact with the rest of the world. So I decided, that was one of them. There were other things, to give up painting. And as a gesture to myself, I took all the paintings that I had in the studio, and my gardener and I, this was in Boulogne, in France, made a bonfire of all of them, where I danced around it like Navajo Indians. And that I felt relieved at after that gesture. I felt I had really given it up.
Steichen and his camera, he carries it wherever the action is. France, World War I, and something called aerial photography. Or World War II, the Navy in the Pacific. a captain bamboozling generals, a commander intimidating admirals, hanging out of a rickety flying coffin, heading toward Japan on an aircraft carrier. The grim realities of war help shape the Steichen style. The ships, the planes, the sharp speed of a fighter blasting off the deck and into battle. And the faces of the young fighting move him to instruct his staff.
Concentrate on the men. The ships and guns are going to be obsolete one of these days, but the men in wartime will never be obsolete.
And the faces of war became the theme of several Steichen exhibitions.
I had a feeling, or a hope rather, that if people really saw what war was like in all its bestiality and brutality, that might be a deterrent, and the people would rise. People came to the exhibition, thought they were very interesting. Sometimes you'd see somebody with a tear in their eye, but everybody walked out and completely forgot all about it. And the reason for this suddenly struck me, that was approaching the idea from a negative standpoint. And from a negative standpoint, nothing ever does any good. So thinking about it, I said, now, switching from the positive standpoint, I ought to show what a wonderful thing life is, and how human beings all over the world are alike. This then resulted in the Family of Man exhibition.
3 years spent selecting photographs. Steichen at 76 completes the exhibition, and 9 million people around the world witness his testament to man in common. They see, as Carl Sandburg wrote in prologue, that the first cry of a newborn baby in Chicago or Sampoango, in Amsterdam or Rangoon, has the same pitch and key, each saying, I am, I have come through, I belong, I am a member of the family.
Well, when I was a kid, about, I should say 7 or 8 years old, my mother had a millinery store in Milwaukee, and coming home from school one day, as I came into the store, I opened the door once more out to the street and I yelled out, "You dirty little kike." My mother, who was waiting on customers deeper in the store, called to me and said, "What did you say then?" And I innocently repeated this remark. And so she excused herself from her customers, saying she wanted to talk to the boy, her boy. And the customers left. My mother locked the store door, and we went upstairs to our apartment, and she talked to me for several hours. She told me that all the people in the world were alike, regardless of race, creed, or color. She even quoted the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to me, where that term is used without regard to race, creed, or color. And it was a stupid thing, all prejudice, and that was nothing but prejudice, she said. All prejudices are bad, and I have come to the conclusion that she was right about that. And that lesson, I think, was the groundwork for the Family of Man. My mother began the exhibition.
Steichen's life today in Connecticut. His wife, Joanna, bringing lunch, a spot cleared among the books and papers for the milk and cookies, which he usually shares with Fintan, a monumentally shaggy Irish wolfhound, and a 3-legged beagle called Tripod.
I'm afraid when you come to see us and see how we live and what we do, it doesn't look very exciting. because so much of what we do is just sitting and thinking.
This time of year, though, there are always pictures to consider. Photographs for exhibitions, folders of Steichen's flower prints, especially his latest creation, the Connecticut Yankee, a delphinium named for Mark Twain, who lived near here.
Of course, no one has seen any of these things, any delphinium, any Connecticut Yankees that look like this. All they've seen is the annual growth.
Yeah.
This is what the plant looks like as a mature plant.
An entirely new flower, and Steichen's worked as long and lovingly on it as on any photograph. He told the president about it and has planted a batch for Ladybird. People who have never seen a Yankee have some grand surprise coming this summer, he says, in a tone he usually saves for talk about his camera or his wife.
Well, I suppose it's perfectly natural for a man, a young fellow or an old fellow, to think his wife is tops. And it's rather hard for me to find anything that she doesn't do well. She does some things much better, of course. She rides a horse and takes jumps. That's in real professional style. She's a moderately good cook, but she's not a cordon bleu. She's never had any experience or training in that line. She has a lovely voice and accompanies herself on the guitar like nobody's business.
As I went out one fair May morn down by the flowing river, the birds they sang, the lambs they played, and pleasant was the weather. Folk singing is something I do mostly for myself, and the captain likes it. I'm not a musician, but it's a great satisfaction just to play a few chords and sing a few lines with it. As we trudged along together, it was hand in hand we trudged along, pleasant was the weather, and many the flattering tales we told as we trudged along together.
6 or 7 times a day, by his own count, Steichen takes a walk down to the greenhouse with Joanna and the dogs. A walk toward fields planted with the delphinium Steichen's been breeding since 1910. He names them for poets, and he's been known to x-ray them, spray them with hormones, inoculate them, and even jump up and down on them to get new breeds. He claims to have interfered with more delphinium than anyone in the world. During World War I, the Germans trampled his delphinium fields in France, and the English bivouacked on them. Neighbors salvaged a few of the plants, and these he brought to Connecticut. He had 20 years with them before the next war came.
Just before World War II, I had a 10-acre field of delphinium. And in order not to have them on my mind and be worrying about them, I sent a plow out into the field to plow them all under her. I had lifted about 2 dozen of the best plants and brought them over here into the garden. I didn't want to have them on my mind in the Navy when I had other things to do.
The greenhouse is a bright hodgepodge of flowers and plants. Steichen claims it would be the despair of any first-class school-graduated gardener from Kew Gardens. He learns by trial, error, and patient work, and he likes to boast that the mistakes he makes are very honest pieces of stupidity. And if you ask him about his green thumb...
The green thumb is a simple matter. I think green thumb is if you've got an interest in plants and work with them a while, you acquire a green thumb. I don't think anybody is born with it. It isn't like the color of your eyes or the color of your hair.
Years with plants and flowers. Steichen says he looks at flowers and sees pattern, an unerring harmony of parts. He calls this nature's principle of proportion, and over the years he's found and photographed it in every natural form. The sunflower in seed, the lotus, the snail's shell. He has learned to apply this principle to his own art, and especially to the composition of triangular characters he calls uchins, with which he planned to illustrate a children's book. Steichen says he never felt so free and so sure as when he created these uchins under the relentless discipline of nature's rule.
I'm afraid to use that word created. That's used so freely on Madison Avenue. As a matter of fact, they have almost a monopoly of it now, the creative, that I'm a little afraid of it. I think using the word creative that easily is certainly disrespectful and understanding to the little woman who carries the sperm of the male. We attach to her ovary for 9 long, weary months before she produces the child. Let's take that as a standard of creation, a willed human creation, and then I think you'll find the Madison Avenue use of the term a little ambiguous or ridiculous.
This is Edward Steichen will continue. Steichen at 86, deep in what he likes to call his third apprenticeship. One day, looking for a new discipline, he decided to photograph only what he could see from the windows of his house, and noticed one small blossoming shadblow tree, planted some 30 years before, forgotten, rediscovered on a spring morning in its first bloom.
You know, I began photographing this tree about 6 or 7 years ago, and in still photographs, color still photographs. And after I had 500 or 600 slides, I wondered what to do with them. I tried to organize them into a series, but I found that in projecting the slides, each one counted separately. I couldn't bring the idea of a mood, like a sonata, where the little tree would be the leading lady, and the landscape and the weather, even like this today, would be part of the scene. So then it occurred to me to combine these films that I had made, rephotograph them onto movie film. Thinking about that still further, I said, what the heck? Why don't I do the thing over again and do it on film? The idea of this film is not a record of how the tree looks at different seasons of the year or anything, but to present a series of moods. Some of the things will not happen again. You see, photographing a tree is not like photographing a person. You can ask the person to do things. That little tree has entirely a will of its own, and that's governed by the weather and the hours of the day. It's a symbol, that tree, of everything that exists in nature. And I look upon it almost as a human being, as a little girl. Cold day, ain't it, little girl, huh? Yes, that's all right. It won't be long now. The weather will get warm and you will bloom out again.
Carl Sandburg is married to the captain's sister. In 1920, Carl wrote a book of verses called Smoke and Steel, and he dedicated it to the captain with this poem. Painter of nocturnes and faces, camera engraver of glints and moments, listener to blue evening winds and new yellow roses, dreamer and finder, rider of great mornings in gardens, valleys,